Hi everyone, it's 5:30, so I'm going to make a start. Thank you for coming along and logging in, and welcome to the Applicants event for Classical Civilization. So I'm just going to start off by doing a few introductions. So my name's Sarah Bell. I'm the head of Classical Civilization, Philosophy and Religion and Ethics here. Today we're just talking about classical civilization. We're also really privileged to have three lovely upper sixth students with us. So I'm just going to ask them to introduce themselves and talk about what subjects they're doing as well. So Eloise, if you want to start, that would be great.
Hi, I'm Eloise. I went to Riddlesdown Collegiate. I'm currently studying Classics, French and English, and I hope to do Ancient History and English at Leeds.
Thank you, Eloise. And Luke?
Hi, I'm Luke. I went to Reigate School. I'm currently studying Classics, English Language and Literature and Early Modern History, and I'm looking to do journalism at Oxford Brookes.
And Anna?
Hi, I'm Anna. I went to Oakwood. I'm currently doing Classics, Philosophy and English, and I will be doing Classics and Philosophy at Royal Holloway.
Thank you, Anna. We'll be hearing more from them later on. So just a couple of things. I'm going to, if you've got any questions throughout the course of this webinar, you can put them into the Q&A. We'll be using the chat function later when we do a bit of an interactive lesson. And yeah, any questions generally about the course, though, put them into the Q&A. So what's the aim of today? So it's to give you more information about the course, because I imagine it's going to be brand new to lots of you. Also to give you a little bit of a flavour of what it's like to study classical civilization. So we're going to have a mini lesson, and then you're going to give you the opportunity to hear from current students, and you can ask any questions, as I said already. Okay, so what is classical civilization? You will find if you choose to study it at Reigate College that when you tell people what you're studying, they'll be like, classical civilization, what's that? It's basically all of those things you can see on the screen and more. So it's the study of the ancient world. Often when we think about the ancient world, we think about ancient Greece and ancient Rome, but actually it spreads all the way to Afghanistan, to Spain, to Britain, North Africa. And so we'll be looking at the literature, the culture, so the way they lived, the beliefs they had. We'll look at art and architecture. We'll look at a little bit of ancient philosophy, and we'll be sort of dipping our toes in lots of different areas. So it's a really interesting subject that ties in to lots of other subjects. As my students will know, my motto is classics is everywhere, because by the time you've been studying it for a few weeks, you will realise this, and then you can tell everyone else. Okay, so onto the more practical stuff, which is what will you be studying? So there's 4 topics overall. In year 1, you'll study a piece of literature called the Odyssey by Homer. So this is a bit of Greek myth. It's about the hero Odysseus and his journey home from the Trojan War. So he came up with the idea of the Trojan horse, which you may have heard of. If you haven't, don't worry, because you will do when you start. And it's about his journey home. So he meets goddesses and monsters, and then when he gets home, he's got a whole load of problems to deal with because his house has been invaded by suitors of his wife, because he's been away for 20 years at this point. And we study it as a brilliant story, which is what it is. I think it was voted the best story ever quite recently in some survey. And it's also a great piece of literature. So we look at it in terms of the literary techniques that are used, the characters and the themes, and also what it can tell us about the 8th century BC, which is when it was written, and what life was like, and also what it can tell us about before then, when we think the Trojan War may have happened. And alongside that, we do a unit called Imperial Image. So this is more of a Roman unit. The Odyssey is Greek, Imperial Image is Roman, and it's about Rome's first emperor, who was called Augustus. In fact, he had quite a few different names, but we'll get to that later. And it's about how he used propaganda to maintain his power. So he was effectively a king, but the Romans hated kings. So he had to convince the Romans that he wasn't really a king, or if he was a king, it was still better off with him than without him. So it's a really interesting study of art, architecture. We'll look at coinage, like we'll look at a little bit later this evening, and we'll also look at poetry and the literature that came out, as well as what people wrote about him later and what he wrote about himself. So it's a really broad, interesting subject, and it will give you a really good basis of understanding about the Roman world. So that's year 1. And then the fun continues in year 2, where you'll study a text called the Aeneid by Virgil. So the Odyssey is written from a Greek perspective. The Aeneid is written from a Roman perspective, and it's about Trojan refugees and their journey to find a new home, because obviously Troy is burning thanks to Odysseus. And again, it's an amazing piece of literature. It's a little bit darker, I would say, than the Odyssey. There's quite a lot of tragedy in it, but it's just a really wonderful tale about the human condition, I think. And actually, we've got a speaker coming in a couple of weeks who's going to talk to our students about how the Aeneid relates to the modern refugee crisis, and it's really fascinating how relevant actually both of these stories are. So we study that, and then alongside that we study a unit called Greek religion. So there's a little bit of Greek myth in Greek religion, but it's not really a Greek myth course. It's more about what the Greeks believed, or what we can work out that they might have believed, the sort of religious practice they were involved in. We look at some of the sanctuaries that they worshipped at, and yeah, lots of really fascinating stuff. We look at oracles, we look at healing cults, we look at philosophy, and it's just a really fascinating broad subject. Okay, so how is it assessed? So it's a 100% exam at the end of year 2. So this is definitely something that you should think about. So obviously you're all coming up to your GCSEs, and it's worth considering how you feel about exams and how you feel about coursework. So the advantage is you get to have 2 years of learning all this wonderful stuff, and then you can show the examiner what you know at the end. So there's 3 exams. One is the World of the Hero, and that's 2.5 hours long. One is the Imperial Image, that's an hour and 45 minutes. And the final exam is Greek religion, which is also an hour and 45 minutes. So quite long exams, but by the time you get there, you'll be really used to writing, and we give you lots of support in terms of essay writing, how to structure essays, how to plan them. But you do need to be quite comfortable with reading and writing in order to study the subject. Okay, so in terms of the amount of lessons you'll have a week, so you'll have 2 lessons per week, and each lesson is 2 hours long. So a 2-hour lesson can feel like that's quite a lot, probably longer than the lessons you have at the moment, but actually it's fine. And hopefully the students can nod and agree that it's fine. Excellent. And then you'll also have about 4 hours homework a week, and that'll be the same for every subject you choose to study at the college. We also have extra support lessons, so what we call plus lessons. So there's often that's offered in the lower sixth and to every student in the upper sixth. And there's also lots of other academic support that we can offer you, and I can talk a little bit more about that if you want me to, if you want to put it into the Q&A. The other thing that's brilliant about studying classics is there's lots of trips and visits that we do. So in the last 3 years, they've included a trip to Greece, which we did a couple of years ago, a trip to Rome that we did last year. We always do a trip to the British Museum for the upper sixth. If there's a really relevant exhibition, like there was a Troy exhibition a few years ago, we'll go to that. We took a group of lower sixth students to Warwick University in November. So they do something called an Ancient Worlds Day. And you can often see these events on the news page of the website, which is quite a good thing to look at and help you get to know what we do at Reigate a little bit more for all of the subjects. We also have visiting and virtually visiting speakers. So as I spoke already about the professor who's coming in to speak to us in a few weeks. And then we did a few years ago, we had a virtual tour of the Museum of Archaeology in Cambridge. So there's loads going on. I'll just show you now a few pictures of the trips that we've had. So on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see pictures from Rome this year. You might even be able to spot Luke in there somewhere, but you'd have to have pretty good eyesight. And then from the year before when we went to Greece, and you can see all of our students lined up to run on the original Olympic track there. But they're just fantastic opportunities for students to really see all these things that they're studying and get a real feel for it. So definitely something that you should participate in if you have the opportunity. And then we also, a couple of years ago, did a trip to Bath and Caerleon in Wales, which has an amazing amphitheatre, which I bet not many of you knew about, but it might be useful for you perhaps in part of your preparation to have a little weekend trip to Bath or a weekend trip to Wales and visit these places. We did that the year after COVID when we weren't able to do any residential trips. But again, these are really great places to just give you a bit of a flavour of what classics is about and to really explore whether it's something you're interested in or not. Okay, so what do you need to do well on the course? So the entry requirement is a grade 5 in English language. I've already talked about how we study 2 texts, and so you do need to be quite comfortable with reading. You don't have to be brilliant at reading. You don't have to be really fast at reading. You just have to enjoy a good story and be comfortable with the fact that every week part of your homework will be sitting down and reading a brilliant story. So yeah, grade 5 in English language. Also some interest in the ancient Greeks and Romans. I mean, hopefully that's why you're here tonight, but you don't have to know anything about them. It might be that you just did a little bit of the Greeks and Romans at primary school and really enjoyed it. Or it might be, I don't know, that you like Percy Jackson, or you've watched I don't know, Spartacus or Gladiator 2, any of those things. You thought, actually, this world seems really exciting. We've already talked about enjoying reading, but also one of the great things about classics is it's going to help you understand the world that you live in. I think it opens students' minds because we have so little left of the ancient world to study. We have to put together lots of hypotheses about what might be happening or about what they might be thinking or how the audience of these ancient monuments might have responded. And I think that's a really important skill to learn, and it can help you understand more about the world that we live in. So you just have to have those things and then you're in. Okay, so in terms of added things we've done, I've already talked about trips. I've already talked about visiting speakers. We also have a lot going on in terms of enrichment activities. So we have beginners and intermediate Latin that we do. We also teach ancient Greek. So we have a little course running this year. Students are going to be taking a certificate in it in June. It's called Intermediate Ancient Greek. They're all run as activities and they're valued by universities. They're really good things to talk about on things like personal statements and in CVs, but also along the Classics is Everywhere line, you will notice how Greek and Latin are used in all sorts of industries. I mean, I've just put here law, horticulture, languages and medicine, but they really will help your understanding of those things if they're also areas that you're interested in. Also, they're really fun. And I think there's something very therapeutic about sitting down and translating some ancient language. So this is a really great opportunity and students generally really enjoy it. Okay, so now we are going to start a little mini lesson. So this is based around the imperial image topic. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background. It's quite hard to put a really big period of history into a few bullet points, but I'm going to try and summarize it. If you want me to clarify anything, please just put it into the chat. So this is about Octavian and Mark Antony. Now, something that is quite confusing is that Octavian and Augustus are the same person. Octavian was called Octavian, and then when he got really big and powerful, the Senate, so that's the government in Rome, they gave him the name Augustus. So for the purposes of this little lecture, I'm going to call him Octavian, because at this period in time, he was Octavian. Don't worry if you find it confusing. It is a bit confusing. You know, the students may nod to agree with that, but you'll get really comfortable with it. Okay, so we have to start with a very famous event in history, and that is the assassination of Julius Caesar. So Julius Caesar was a top Roman He was really powerful. He'd conquered loads of a place called Gaul, which is modern day France, but he was unpopular because anyone who gets a lot of power becomes unpopular. And he didn't really read the room and ended up being assassinated by several of his colleagues during a Senate meeting. Anyway, he didn't have a male heir, so he left everything to his great nephew Octavian, who is only 18 at the time. And obviously this is big news. So he gets the name Caesar, and he gets all the money that is associated with Julius Caesar. Now, Mark Antony was Julius Caesar's best friend, and he sort of expected to inherit everything, but didn't. Gets really cross about that, and there's various different conflicts over the next 10 years. But essentially, he runs off to Egypt, and he falls in love with Cleopatra, the Queen of Egypt, at this point, and they are a really close-knit couple with great dreams of power. So, for various reasons, Octavian becomes quite worried about Mark Antony and that him and Cleopatra want to take over Rome. So he starts a process of really manipulating the government to wage war against him and Cleopatra. And so in 31 BC, Octavian and his right-hand man, Agrippa, fight a battle called the Battle of Actium. And during that battle, Mark Antony and Cleopatra, they both flee back to Egypt. Mark Antony realizes pretty quickly that he's not really got a way out, so he commits suicide. And then a little while after, Cleopatra does the same because she doesn't want to be led back to Rome in triumph. So that is the sort of very brief history of what's going on at the start of Augustus's rule. Now, on this next slide, you will see a coin that hopefully you're familiar with. Now, I'm going to talk about it a little bit more, and the students that I have here are. But if you have got your worksheet that we sent you, if you could, or it's a bit blurry, if you could put your answers to questions 3, 4, and 5, or to one or two of them into the chat, that would be brilliant. So, these are all really about thinking about how the ancient world has influenced the modern world. So the first coin is what image is on every single coin that we use nowadays. Why do you think that image is put onto British coins? And how effective do you think coinage generally is for propaganda? Okay, so while I'm giving you a bit more information about the coin, I want you to just type your ideas into the chat and any questions that you've got particularly about this coin. Okay, so what you can see in front of you is a coin which has 2 heads on one side, and it's got what looks like a crocodile on the other side, and loads of interesting things to say about this. The side which has got 2 heads on, one of those heads is Augustus, or Octavian, whatever you like, and the other one of those heads is Agrippa, who you may remember was his right-hand man. So Eloise, if you wouldn't mind just talking to us a little bit about why it's so interesting that Agrippa is on here, please.
Yeah, so he doesn't really often appear on coinage, despite the fact that he was the one who masterminded all of Augustus's military campaigns and was a much better general. He's actually not really mentioned a lot in the sources that we study during the A-levels, and that includes the Res Gestae, which is basically a documentation of all of Augustus's victories and things that he achieved. And Agrippa's just never mentioned, which is quite sad.
Yeah, we all love Agrippa, don't we? He's like the sort of the silent power in the group. And what's really nice about what you did there, Eloise, is that you sort of tied in 2 sources together, and we're always encouraging students to sort of overlap the sources as they get to know them. Eloise, what other messages do you think there are on that side of the coin?
So there's lots. There's it tells us visually that Augustus and Agrippa work together. There's also inscriptions such as imp, which means imperator, which is commander in Latin, and that alludes to his military success and victories. There's also divi F, which means divi filius, which is son of a god in Latin. And it's important that Augustus claimed to be the son of a god after Julius Caesar died, because Julius Caesar was pronounced a god himself. So this kind of gave him claim to not the throne, but to power.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, you said the throne there, and essentially it is a throne that he is claiming there. That's great. Okay, so if we now look at the other side of the coin, which is also very interesting, Luke, can you talk to us a little bit about what the message is there?
Yeah, so the inscription on there, Col Nem, refers to a colony in France, which tells us where the coin would have been minted and shows the quite widespread nature of the message, having been minted all the way out in France compared to at home in Rome. The message itself, you've got a crocodile and a palm tree, and the crocodile is chained, which links to the defeat of Mark Antony and Cleopatra and the addition of Egypt to the Roman Empire.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you. Thank you, Luke. The other thing that we often have to think about with these coins, because it's not always do they reach the widest audience. You know, Luke talked about that there, about how it obviously these messages reach France, but it's also about, are they reaching the right audience? So, Luke, what can we tell about who this coin was made for, do you think? Who's the audience of this coin?
So it's a dupondius, which is a copper coin, which is the lowest level of coinage at the time. And that tells us that it was likely used by everyone of any social status, rich or poor. So it was passed around in Rome and anywhere where Roman currency is being used across the empire.
That's brilliant. Thank you. And another thing we need to think about is how much control Augustus has over this image, because obviously he's not sitting in his house minting them on his own. So Anna, what do you think about how much control Augustus would have had over the images that were put?
Well, it's difficult to know, but assuming from the fact that all of the images of Augustus look quite similar on all the coinages, we can assume that he had a team of image makers who ensured that his image was stable.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah, it's a proper business around this promotion of the person with all the power. Another thing I think that's quite interesting is this is obviously very sort of pro-Actium and the conquest of Egypt, but that had happened quite a long time before this coin was minted. So this coin was minted, it could have been minted as late as 10 BC. It's quite difficult to tell sometimes. So what is the fact that it is minted so much later than the Battle of Actium, which is in 31 BC? What might that tell us?
It could tell us, or it does tell us that the victory in Egypt was a very important part of Augustus's career. He used the victory to give credibility to his reign and create an image of military strength and security.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, it just plays into so many different aspects of why he's brilliant, or supposedly brilliant, and we can see that perfectly on the coin. So thank you, students. I'm just going to go to the chat now and see what your responses were. So thinking more about how coinage is used as propaganda nowadays, lots of you have put into the chat the fact that it's the leader of the country, the British monarch. Obviously, most of our coins still have Queen Elizabeth II on them, but we will start seeing more come through with Charles III. I'm looking at my historians. Okay, Charles III on them. Sarah has said here that they're probably on the coin because they represent Britain, and these are British coins, and that's a brilliant thing, actually, Sarah, because the fact that we think they represent Britain, I mean, the monarchy's done its job there, hasn't it? Because there's often lots of discussion, isn't there, about whether we need a monarchy? But if we're saying that that's part of who we are, then of course we do. And John here has put that it's very useful coinage, as everyone uses the currency, so the majority of the population would see it. And Luke talked about that in relation to the coin that's on the screen as well. I'm just having a look through here. Poppy, you've said that you think it would have been more meaningful in the olden days because it might have lost its power as the monarch has less power over society. I mean, I wonder how many of you were sort of dashing around to look for a coin, to actually have a look. I mean, I haven't even got a coin in my wallet anymore. And so that brings us into thinking, like, what is the new sort of propaganda? I mean, I suppose it's social media, isn't it? It's TikTok or Facebook or Instagram. But yeah, that all comes from this idea of images to promote someone, all comes from the ancient world. And not, I mean, Augustus wasn't the first person to do it. We have coins with Alexander the Great on and Julius Caesar, but it's really interesting how that idea of image is power, is created and is still used today. Just having a look at Alex. Yeah, King Charles's head. Oh, I wonder if you've seen a King Charles coin. I haven't seen one yet, because he's the country's figurehead. It presents that image to everyone. Oh, we've got some brilliant replies here. Sorry if I can't read them. If I can't read them all out. Yeah, I think that coinage is slightly effective for propaganda as it can enforce who's in charge. That's a really important point, actually, because even if we're not necessarily pro-monarchy, that message is always going into our head, isn't it, that they're important. Okay, thank you for all your responses. Darcy has said it shows their power, wealth and control. It reminds people who the monarchy is, who's in power. Yeah, you've got it. You've all got it. Exactly why coinage is so important. Thank you. Okay, so we've done this coin. We understand it. You can go off and talk about it. Well, not now, because I'm still talking. We're going to look now at this poem here, which is from a poet called Horace. Oh, sorry. What I would like you to do for this one is similar to before. I'm going to read it out. I'm going to ask some questions of my students, and then I'd like you, with your wonderful worksheet, to just, what I think I'd like you to do is, can you put into the chat the positive and the negative language that you see in this poem? Think about the impression it gives us of the various people. So I'm going to read through it and then I'll give you a bit of a summary of what's it about, because it can be a little bit confusing. Okay, so this is by Horace. He's a famous Roman poet. It's worth considering that Horace is sponsored by Augustus. He is not told what to write by Augustus, but it will go in his favour if he writes favourable things. Okay, now's the time for drinking deep, and now's the time to beat the earth with unfettered feet. The time to set out the gods' sacred couches, my friends, and prepare a Salian feast. It would have been wrong before today to broach the Caecuban wines from out the ancient bins, while a maddened queen was still plotting the Capitol's and the empire's ruin, with her crowd of deeply corrupted creatures, sick with turpitude, she violent with hope of all kinds and intoxicated by fortune's favour. But it calmed her frenzy that scarcely a single ship escaped the flames, and Caesar reduced the distracted thoughts bred by Mariotic wine to true fear, pursuing her close as she fled from Rome. Out to capture that deadly monster, bind her, as the sparrow hawk follows the gentle dove, or the swift hunter chases the hare over the snowy plains of Thessaly. So quite powerful poetry there. And I think what is key with the poetry is not worry about understanding it all. He probably doesn't even understand it all, but just think, what impression are you getting? What mood or atmosphere, what words help you understand the message that is being sent? Okay, so let's have a little bit of a chat about this. Luke, can you just tell me a bit about how you see Cleopatra here? How is she portrayed?
Well, not very well. She's explicitly referenced as a maddened queen plotting the empire's ruin, so very anti-Roman. There's hints at drunkenness and violence and just general madness and frenzy. But quite confusingly, she's also compared to a dove and a hare, so she's given quite a nice innocent perspective as well. So it makes it quite hard to get a good meaning out of it.
Yeah, I mean, poetry is notoriously challenging, isn't it? I think it means to be challenging, and it is challenging, and you can interpret it your own way. But while we might expect Horace to be like anti-Cleopatra, this is certainly, as you've said, a little bit more ambiguous than that. Now, a key figure in the whole conflict with Cleopatra was Mark Antony. But Luke, why do you think he's not mentioned here?
Well, because mentioning him would make all of the general public of Rome aware that Augustus, or at this time Octavian, is taking part in a civil war, which is very much frowned upon in Rome, and it wouldn't affect his political image quite nicely.
Yeah, thank you. And that's a really important thing about the Battle of Actium generally is there's a thing which scholars call the myth of Actium. This idea that actually it wasn't about Romans at all, it's all about Egypt. And you can see from this just an extract of the poem how Egypt, Cleopatra centered this is. I mean, it's called Cleopatra. And actually it does echo what we see in the other sources is Mark Antony is virtually never mentioned until after Augustus has died. Okay, so we've talked about Cleopatra. Anna, what about not Mark Antony, he's not there. What about Augustus, Anna?
Well, since Cleopatra is portrayed by Horace as such a threat, it really makes him an impressive and strong leader as he is able to defeat her. And through the comparison of him being a hunter and a sparrowhawk, this shows how ruthless he can be to protect Rome. Yeah,
that's brilliant. Some brilliant analysis of the language used there, and some brilliant picking out of words that we've got on the chat. So yeah, John, you've said about the positive language. So beating the earth with unfettered feet. That means dancing, barefoot dancing, friends and feast, and then lots of negative language as well, like maddened, violent. She's very much portrayed as this sort of insane woman, but what we do know about Cleopatra from like the less biased sources is she was a very intelligent, very powerful woman. Thank you to Alex, who's pointed out lots of other positive language, as well as the things like deadly, turpitude, corrupted, plotting. Other positive languages, drinking deep. There's this idea of celebration. Yeah, this is brilliant. You've picked up, oh yeah, deadly monster. Thank you, Danny. That's a really good one, which all just shows how Horace, the Romans, Augustus wanted Cleopatra to be seen. Okay, so that's been quite the whistle-stop tour or whistle-stop lesson. Obviously, in actual lessons, we would explore these in a lot more detail. We might try out a couple of exam-type questions in terms of analysing it. But the students, you have responded brilliantly, and everyone at home as well. So those of you at home now are going to have an opportunity to show us what you think, and we're going to set up a couple of polls which hopefully should be quite straightforward for you to do. So the first question is, how successful is the portrayal of Augustus as a capable military leader in these sources? What do you think? So yeah, place your vote. Okay, we've got a bit of a battle between very successful and partially successful at the moment. Keep voting. Oh, it's really neck and neck. Okay. Hopefully you've all voted. I think there's a few more people who could let me know what they think. Okay, I'm not sure it's going to change much from there. Or another one. Nobody's thinking he's not successful. Okay, so I think we should stop the poll there and share the results. So 45% of you think he is very successful and 55% think he is partially successful. That's really good. And I think it's really interesting that nobody said he's not successful, because I don't think you could really say that on that one. Okay, thank you. Let's go on to the next one. All right. So the next question is, how successful is the portrayal of Cleopatra as an enemy that needed to be defeated in these sources? Off you go. So do you think the portrayal of her is very successful, partially successful, or not successful at all? So get your votes in. Again, I think you're all realizing that there is a sort of relative amount of success. It's really split actually between very successful and partially successful. Okay, maybe get a few more votes in. Okay, let's share the results. That's very interesting. So pretty much 50-50. So 48% for very successful. That's changed, I think, at the last minute. 52% partially successful. I mean, what's really interesting about these questions is we will never really know, because all we have is the propaganda left. But I suppose the obvious thing is that this propaganda would not have kept on being produced if it wasn't successful. So, so well done. Okay, let's have a look then at the next question. So having looked at the evidence, so the evidence is the coin and the poem, do you think Augustus portrayed the conflict with Mark Antony and Cleopatra as a civil war, so a Rome v Rome war, or a foreign war, Rome v Egypt? What do you think? Okay, lots of enthusiasm for the foreign war here. So far, there's a few votes coming in for civil war. Okay, that's it. Keep voting. I think we've got a couple more. All right, brilliant. Thank you. Right, let's share the results. So they're a little bit more one-sided. So lots of you have gone for foreign war, and presumably that's because of the focus on Cleopatra and Egypt there. And I think what's interesting is that the Romans are not stupid. We know they're not stupid, don't we? Just because we're talking about them. So they would have known that Mark Antony was involved and that it was a civil war. But yet there's very little evidence from the time of Augustus to demonstrate that. Thank you so much for participating. That's brilliant. Okay, so hopefully that's given you a bit of an insight into one side of the course. And if you've got any questions about, the other aspects of the course that we talked about at the beginning, then please sort of continue to put them into the Q&A. Okay, so a little bit more about why I suppose you should study it at Reigate College. We have got really good grades. I mean, the chances of you coming out with an A star, an A or a B are higher than you coming out with any other grade. We've had 100% pass rate for the last 2 years, which we're really proud of. We're also proud of the fact that we've got students who come from a really diverse range of backgrounds. They get places at a huge range of universities. We have students who go on to study at Oxford or Cambridge. We just had a student offered a place at classics at Oxford to study classics at Oxford. We've already heard earlier, in fact, I might just get students, if you could just remind us what universities you're hoping to go to, that would be great. So Luke, if you could just remind us.
I'm heading to Oxford Brookes for journalism.
Thank you. Eloise?
My first option is Leeds, but I'm also considering Bristol, Exeter, Newcastle and Birmingham.
Good choices.
I will be going to Royal Holloway for classics and philosophy combined.
That's brilliant. Thank you. So you can see, you can see there are a range of different universities. Not such a wide range of subjects, but these are my sort of golden students. So yeah, they do. We've had students go on to study zoology, sociology, criminology, psychology. We've got a student this year who's going to study to be a primary teacher. We have lots of students who go on to study classics or ancient history or archaeology. So it's one of those subjects that you might think, now what can I do with that if you don't want to study classics? But actually, it's just a really well-respected subject. And obviously what you want is to come out with good grades, and the figures on the screen show you that is probably going to happen, and then that just means that your choices are wider, aren't they? In terms of employability skills, there's loads of different things, lots of different skills, that classics can offer you, and I'm not going to read through them all, but we do lots of group work in class, so you learn how to work together. We do lots of talking exercises to try and increase confidence and your ability to articulate your argument. As I mentioned before, classics is all about taking the evidence which you've got, which is not always the best evidence, but it's the only evidence, and working out what conclusions you can draw from that, and always being cautious about it. So yeah, loads of employability skills that you will take into your future. So what can you do to prepare for the course? So there's so much out there. I mean, there's Gladiator 1 and 2. I don't know if any of you have seen either of those, but you should. There's also other films. I mean, some of these are quite old. I've put Spartacus 300 there, but that's 2 separate films. Sorry about that. There's loads of good documentaries on, and I've put a few of them on there. I've tried to get the most up-to-date streaming services, but it feels like every year the streaming services change. There's some books there that are brilliant reads. The Penelopiad by Margaret Atwood, all the books by Stephen Fry, even though they're very myth-based and the course isn't necessarily myth-based. Lots of our students love Greek myth. Circe by Madeline Miller is a brilliant one, particularly in relation to the Odyssey, and a more sort of historical novel. Yeah, Eloise is nodding her head there. Is the Imperium Trilogy by Robert Harris. Also in April, there's a film coming out. You might want to write it down, called The Return, with Ralph Fiennes and Juliette Binoche, and that is about that's about the second half of the Odyssey. I've no idea if it's any good, but I'd really recommend going to see it. And there is another, they just released, didn't they, in the media, that they're gonna start making another Odyssey film. So if you want to just take a quick photo of that slide, then just so you can remember which are the things to go off and have a look at. I also just read a really brilliant book called X Marks the Spot, which is all about sort of 8 great archaeological discoveries. That's my current recommendation. Okay, so thank you. You've listened to me now for quite a long time. And what I would really like to do is have a look at some of the questions that you might have. So feel free to put them into the Q&A as soon as possible. Okay, thank you. Oh, okay. So how many hours of lessons versus homework? So that's a really good question. So it's basically the same. So you will have 4 hours of lessons and you'll have about 4 hours of homework. You know, the students who are getting the highest grades are often doing more than that. But the important thing to remember is you'll only have 12.5 hours in college of timetabled lessons in your first year. There may be other things that get slotted in here and there. But you're going to have lots of time on your timetable. And I always say to students, if you work from 9 till 5 every day, you would get all of your work done. Poppy has asked if we learn about the Greek gods. So we do learn about the Greek gods. The first part of the Greek religion topic is about being able to identify the Greek gods, but that's not the sort of key part of the course. That's what I would say. Okay, let's have a look. I think there's some questions in the chat. Do you need a grade 5 in English language, literature, or both? Just language. Okay, we've got here, I'm going to direct this question to Anna, actually. Does philosophy and classics overlap? So Anna does both philosophy and classics. So what do you think, Anna?
I think, obviously, there are some Greek philosophers that we learn about in both subjects, so that's really interesting. And I think essay types of questions are quite similar, just like the amount of writing is quite similar, I'd say.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, Anna. Yeah, the actual sort of subjects studied are quite different, but lots of our students do philosophy as well as classics. They do sort of go quite well together. Oh, okay, so here's a really good question. Okay, so I'm going to ask all of you this one. What do you enjoy most about the subject? So I'm going to start with Eloise.
I think for me, I like Imperial Image the most because I can really see how the propaganda can kind of be related to today. I mean, particularly in American politics, you can see a lot of the stuff that Donald Trump is trying to achieve has also tried to be achieved by Augustus as well. So I think it's really interesting how that topic in particular can relate to the modern day. So yeah, that's what I enjoy.
Thank you, Eloise. I'm really pleased you mentioned that because I think that's really relevant at the moment. Luke, what do you most enjoy?
I'd have to agree with Eloise here, honestly. I think Imperial Image would definitely be my favourite of the topics. I mean, I came from a background of Greek mythology a lot. So the Odyssey was a story that I knew well. The Aeneid was, and alongside Imperial Image, was new to me, and I really enjoy learning that stuff. So yeah, I mean, the whole of the course is great, but the best bits for me were probably Imperial Image and the Aeneid.
Thank you, Luke. And Anna, what about you?
I mostly enjoy all the visual sources, especially like statues or like temples. For example, the Parthenon, it's got so much detail on it. And the Prima Porta statue as well. Like the detail is just beautiful, I think, and it's really interesting.
Yeah, some incredible works of art and architecture that have come out of the ancient world. That is really true. And I think an important thing I want to say about that as well is that we should always remember, like we talk about how great the ancient Greeks and Romans are, but we should also remember that this was a culture that was built on enslavement. Like a lot of those beautiful works of art that we look at were created by people who were not free, and I think that is another really important aspect of classics that that we're trying to incorporate more and more, is to understand the sort of the diversity, the representation that's not necessarily made in the sources, but it's up to us to try and draw it out. So so thank you for that. Okay, so a couple of other questions. Am I the only classics teacher? No, there are two classics teachers. There is myself and Lauren. What are good subjects to do alongside classics? Well, so I think all subjects are good to do alongside classics. I know that might seem like a bit of an odd answer. Lots of our students do essay-based subjects, so philosophy, history, English literature, like the students we have here with us this evening. But we also have students who are doing sciences, or who are doing two other BTECs, and then they're doing an A-level. So because it links into so many different topics, there's not really anything that it excludes. We also have a lot of art students, we have performing arts students. So I think really you just have to choose the subjects that you're interested in. I wouldn't, unless you're thinking of going on to do something like medicine, I wouldn't worry too much about the subject blend. That's probably what I would say. Okay, do we look at any other Roman emperors? I suppose we look at Tiberius a little bit, and we look at what we do is look at how future Roman emperors used what Augustus did as propaganda. So someone like Nero, for instance, he copied a coin that Augustus had created. So we do talk about it in terms of that, but Augustus is very much used as the sort of model that other Roman emperors are measured by. Okay, are the exam essays more similar to an English lit exam, or more history related? Okay, so Eloise, you're doing English lit, aren't you? Okay, do you want to just have a go at answering this? Thanks.
I'd say English literature essays are slightly more in depth than classics ones. And with English literature, you have just one type of essay, which is a 30 marker. But for classics, you've got like a more greater variation on the type of questions that you have to answer. So you might go from a couple 1 marker questions all the way to 30 markers, which I think is nice if you're doing quite a heavy essay-based A-levels, because that variety is actually quite fun to have.
Okay, thank you. And Luke, you're doing history. How would you answer that question?
Well, I'd say it sort of sits between the two. I hate to be a bit unhelpful, but the way or at least from a A-level history perspective, the way that you deal with sources and things in history is very different to how we do with it in classics. Classics it depends on the topic as well. With an imperial image or Greek religion focus, then there's a little bit more of an emphasis on the sources and the material that we still have. Whereas with the Aeneid and with the Odyssey, you've got that little bit more of a English analysis style to it, where we're seeing how Homer or Virgil have created this fantasy landscape in a literary setting.
That's great. That's really helpful. Thank you, both of you. And thank you for the question, Darcy. Okay, so a couple of more questions. So do we just learn about Rome and Egypt, or other countries and cities? So no, it's not just about Rome and Egypt at all. I'm just trying to think about all the countries that we sort of visit through the imperial image. But so basically Augustus, he campaigned all the way out in Spain, and also in Germany. There was a huge defeat in Germany actually as part of his under his rule. And also there is Egypt, there is North Africa. And the Aeneid, actually, one of the best parts of the Aeneid is set in North Africa as well. And then in terms of the Odyssey, like a lot of the Odyssey is based on the Greek islands and on Western Turkey as well. That's where Troy was. And for Greek religion as well, we look at lots of different cults and worship that takes place in Greece, but also in other parts of the Greek world. Okay, what type of questions are there? That's a great question, John. So they're mainly essay types. In the World of the Hero exam, so the World of the Hero exam is the Odyssey and the Aeneid, you will have 3 10-mark questions, 2 20-mark questions, and 1 30-mark question. In the Imperial Image and the Greek Religion exams, you'll have some short mark questions that will add up to 5 marks. You'll have 2 10-mark questions, 1 20-mark question, and a 30-mark question. So it's mainly essay writing. A 10-mark question will be about a page of writing. A 30-mark question will be about 4 to 5 pages. Okay, is it important to memorize dates? Yes, you do need to know some dates, but there's not hundreds of them. There's quite a few dates in the Imperial Image unit. When we get to Greek religion, it's more about centuries. There's not really any dates for the Aeneid or the Odyssey. I mean, Luke, how does the dates memorizing compare to history?
A lot easier, honestly. Other than in Imperial Image, where you've got quite a lot of stuff happening because Augustus is a busy guy. History is much worse with dates. But I mean, you're getting something new every year, every month for some of the stuff, particularly with like French Revolution, for example. Everything's going down at the same time. But it's a lot more relaxed with dates. Other than outside of Imperial Image, it's perfectly fine. Like other than, like Sarah said, a couple of centuries, it's really not that much to handle.
Okay, that's great, thank you. Okay, well, I've just got one last question. Sorry, another question's come in that I'll just cover first. So should we read the text before we start at Reigate? No, there's no need to do that at all. If you want to, you can, but you absolutely don't need to. We will start at the beginning, and when I mean start at the beginning, it's like when you come into my lesson or into Lauren's lesson, we will assume that you know nothing about the ancient world. We're going to start right there, which is part of what makes it so exciting. Okay, one last question I just wanted to ask each of you. So I'm going to start with you, Anna. What advice would you give students who are choosing this course? What advice would you give to new students?
I would say don't worry if you're confused at the start with all the names. For example, Octavian, Augustus, it's very confusing and it feels like there's a million names in the Odyssey, but you will come to know them very well and nothing to stress about.
Great, thank you. Eloise?
I'm kind of similar. I'd say don't stress about not knowing everything at once. And if you really need to, I think it's really good to like not borrow, but magpie work from other people, just to like really develop your knowledge. Because I remember at the start I didn't even do classics at the start, and so it was a lot of work at first. But really, like just asking for help from teachers or students is really important.
That's brilliant advice. Thank you, Eloise. And Luke, any more pearls of wisdom?
I mean, we've had some of the books that we've said are great recommendations. Stuff like the Percy Jackson series is really lighthearted and gives you a surprising amount of background knowledge for Greek myth. That's my foundation, and it's been incredibly helpful and quite enjoyable at the same time. Organization as well. You get a lot of different booklets for the various topics. In all the courses, I've got like a different binder for every topic, so it's a lot. I think being ready to have that level of organization helps, definitely.
That's great, thank you. All brilliant pieces of advice there. Okay, so I'm gonna finish off now. There's going to be a survey at the end of this webinar, and we'd really love it if you could fill it in. It's really helpful for us going forward. So if you can do that, that would be great. Thank you all for coming and listening for an hour. If you've got any questions, it's not as if I've gone away forever. You can always email the college and ask. I'm happy to respond to any queries that you've got, and hopefully we will see all of you on introductory day, and then you can have another little mini lesson and ask me any questions. But thank you to Luke, Eloise and Anna. You're all brilliant, and have a lovely evening. Thank you. Goodbye.